Imagine you're standing in an old warehouse, a warm yellow light spilling across a long, strange block of metal. A car with a helicopter engine mounted at the rear, 3 headlights, and a title whispered as the safest car in the world. And the craziest part, he raised $25 million without selling a single car. But that dream quickly turned into a storm, a trial that shook America. An empire that had barely formed collapsed in an instant. Was it because he was a fraud? Or because Detroit's giants silenced a rival who was simply too dangerous? Today, let's dissect the truth behind the Tucker 48. In 1941, the gunfire at Pearl Harbor pulled the entire United States into the greatest war of the century. In just one night, the automobile assembly lines in Detroit, where the familiar metallic rhythm of V8 engines once echoed, suddenly transformed into war factories. Steel presses that once shaped hoods were now stamping out aircraft skins. The camshaft forges were producing heavy weaponry. Over 4 years, America created an unprecedented miracle. 50 EUR-0 aircraft, 130 EUR-0 engines, 17 EUR-0 heavy guns, and 25 EUR-0 light weapons. And on February 9, 1942, the last civilian car rolled off the line. After that, silence. No more chrome. No more flowing teardrop-shaped fenders. Detroit became the steel fortress of the free world. When the war ended, the United States was flooded with longing. Millions of soldiers came home wanting to settle down, wanting their first car to drive the family around town. Demand exploded, but materials were scarce, and the major manufacturers were not ready. The 1946 models were essentially reworked versions of the 1942 designs, rough, outdated, and lacking appeal. And within that gap, amid the exhaustion of a massive industry, a rare opportunity appeared. If someone was bold enough, fast enough, different enough, they could wedge themselves into a world dominated by the Big Three for decades. These were the very first days when the name Preston Thomas Tucker began to glimmer over Detroit. A man born in Michigan, raised among the sound of steel hammers and the smell of machine oil. Before ever thinking of the Tucker 48, he had created the Tucker Tiger armored combat vehicle, an experience that taught him that metal could protect lives or harm them faster than anything else. Because in the 1940s, the concept of safety barely existed in the minds of automotive designers. Car bodies were rigid steel panels without any crumple zones. In a collision, all the force surged straight into the cabin. And what passengers faced next was an interior made entirely of metal. A sharp-edged steel dashboard, a steering wheel as hard as an iron rod, Dr. latches and shifters turning into spikes in an instant. No seatbelts, no airbags, no impact-absorbing philosophy. Only luck and hope. And it was exactly that obsession that led him to a bold strategy, making safety his unique selling point. This was something no one in Detroit took seriously at the time. They wanted styling, gleaming chrome, seductive curves, anything that could sell cars. The idea for the Tucker 48 began in 1944 when Tucker started by recruiting the talented designer George S. Lawson, who created sketches so bold that no one in Detroit at the time dared to pursue them. The long aerodynamic body lines, the low and seamless front end, all carried the appearance of a machine from the future. This idea was then continuously refined, paving the way for a design revolution he named Torpedo. By February 1946, Tucker officially founded the Tucker Corporation, marking the moment the dream was no longer on paper. To complete the new design, he invited Alex Tremulous, the renowned designer who had worked for Orban and Cord. Tremulous had only 7 days to turn the concept into a real form. And the incredible happened. Within exactly 1 week, he unveiled the completed design of the Tucker 48. Smooth, distinct, and so aerodynamic that no major automaker at the time dared attempt anything similar. But design was only the first step. What shocked the entire industry was the scale Tucker dared to reach for. Preston didn't want a small workshop. He chose to lease the entire Dodge Chicago aircraft engine plant, a complex covering 475 acres. At that time, the largest building in the world, a factory not for small dreamers, but for someone who wanted to build an empire. Financially, Tucker raised $25 million US through stock sales and dealership franchises. In just a short time, 2 Silverado dealerships across the nation were ready to hang the Tucker sign. To maintain cash flow, he devised a strategy never seen before: selling accessories before the car was produced. He opened sales for items such as radios, starters, dashboards, and even interior trim pieces, all components intended for the future. Tucker 48. Buyers were not simply purchasing accessories. They were buying a promise, a place in line. What Tucker called the waiting list. Whoever owned the accessories first would be given priority when the Tucker 48 officially rolled off the line. And the unexpected happened. Americans rushed to buy them. Not because they needed the accessories, but because they wanted to become part of the revolution Tucker was building. In their minds, the Tucker 48 was something far beyond an automobile. It was a symbol of the future. On June 13, 1947, the Tucker factory glowed like a Broadway stage. More than 3 Zordo's guests poured in, crowding around the display area, waiting for the moment the Tucker 48 would appear. The atmosphere that day felt like a direct challenge to Detroit, a declaration that something new was coming. But behind that velvet curtain, Tucker and his engineering team knew the truth. The car was not yet finished, and they were gambling with all the faith they had left. When the Tucker 48 rolled onto the stage, the crowd gasped. Its aerodynamic form, the seamless body lines flowing like wind, and especially the third headlight turning with the steering wheel made everyone feel as if they were witnessing a machine from the future. But just a few minutes later, the excitement cracked. The suspension suddenly collapsed right in front of everyone. The rear engine roared so loudly that Tucker had to signal the band to play louder to drown out the unpleasant noise. And then, the coolant began to boil. The rising heat reminding everyone that Tucker was still far from the finish line. Yet despite all the mishaps, everyone sensed that this was a different kind of car. The heart of the Tucker 48 was the Franklin engine with 6 horizontally opposed cylinders, 334 cub-in displacement. Originally designed for helicopters, the water cooling system allowed the engine to operate smoothly at high-speed ranges, reduce vibrations, and maintain stable power. Very different from most American cars running on air-cooled engines or outdated traditional configurations. Inside the cabin, the small yet revolutionary changes showed that Tucker was not merely talking about safety. The windshield was designed to pop out on impact. The dashboard was padded instead of metal, and the auxiliary gearbox was built for quick removal, making maintenance far easier than on any car of that era. These were not just technical details. They were declarations that an automobile could protect people, not threaten them. And then, under the stage lights, the third headlight, the Cyclops eye, captured every gaze. When the steering wheel turned, its beam swept through the corners, illuminating the dark spots that other cars left a chance. People laughed and called it the three-eyed monster. But it was precisely this uniqueness that allowed the Tucker 48 to step straight into legend. That launch event was full of flaws, full of the awkwardness of an unfinished dream. Yet, it made America pause and wonder if an incomplete car could create such a shockwave. Then, once perfected, how powerful could the Tucker 48 have been? But when the Tucker 48 had just begun receiving the attention of the entire United States, a cold wind suddenly swept through the young empire Preston Tucker had worked so hard to build. It did not come from the production line, nor from the market. It came from the newspapers. The one who opened the attack was Drew Pearson, one of the most powerful journalists of that era. Pearson had an enormous radio audience, and just a hint from him was enough to shake America. In several broadcasts, Pearson raised deeply suspicious questions. Why had Tucker raised tens of millions of dollars, yet still had no completed car? Why was the company's financial structure so murky? And was that 475-acre factory truly operating or merely a facade for a massive scam? Though Pearson's words were harsh and biased, they struck directly at the fears of investors. Within just a few weeks, Tucker Corporation was engulfed in a storm of public opinion. Investors grew tense. Dealers became anxious. The public began to question whether Preston Tucker was a pioneer or merely a fanciful dreamer. Pressure mounted to the point that government agencies were forced to step in. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation with accusations of securities fraud. They focused on Tucker's fundraising methods, selling stock and selling accessories before the car was produced. Although these methods did not explicitly violate any laws, they were unusual enough to raise suspicion among authorities. As the investigation tightened, another blow struck. The steel mill contract, the critical steel supply for the Tucker 48, was suddenly canceled. Many believed that the Big Three had applied pressure to cut off Tucker's lifeline. But, to be fair, in the post-war materials shortage, steel mills prioritized long-standing partners like Ford and GM over a risky startup. By late 1949, everything spiraled out of control. Tucker Corporation was officially taken to court. The trial lasted for months with hundreds of documents, witnesses, and heated debates. The press crowded the courthouse, calling it the automobile trial of the century. Prosecutors portrayed Tucker as a grand fraudster, building a fantastical dream to extract money from the American people. Tucker, meanwhile, stood before the jury, insisting that everything he had done was to create the safest car in America, and that he had been sabotaged by forces unwilling to let an outsider challenge Detroit's order. On January 22, 1950, the verdict was delivered. Preston Tucker was found completely not guilty. The courtroom fell silent for a few seconds before the audience exhaled in relief. Tucker and his team walked out with their heads held high, but that sense of victory was only a brief streak of light in a long, cold winter afternoon. His company's funds were gone. The factory shut down. The production line fell silent. Half-finished Tucker 48s lay scattered across the floor like remnants of a broken dream. Only around 50 completed Tucker 48s were ever produced. And when Preston Tucker passed away in 1956, he had still never seen true justice granted to his vision. A vision extinguished by the harshness of the marketplace and by his own managerial mistakes. Tucker may have been a technical genius, but he was not a sharp financial strategist capable of facing Detroit and Washington at the same time. Looking back at the story of the Tucker 48, many people ask, if there had been no investigation, no media attacks, could Tucker have survived and become the fourth automaker of the United States? The answer, in practical terms, is not simple. Even without the trial, Tucker still faced challenges far too great for a young company of the 1950s. First, he did not have the resources to follow the trend of annual styling changes. The Big Three had turned design updates into their ultimate weapon, making buyers crave new curves, new tail fins, new chrome every year. The investment needed for new stamping dies alone was far beyond the financial reach of Tucker Corporation. In that race, the small player was destined to fall behind. Second, the projected price of around $4 $0 was a major barrier. This was equivalent to a Cadillac, a brand with prestige, service networks, and a proven reputation. Meanwhile, Tucker was a new name, untested, forcing buyers to think twice before committing their money. Third, the American market at that time did not care about safety. It wasn't until the late 1960s that the safety revolution truly began. In 1948, buyers wanted bold styling and powerful engines, not pop-out windshields or padded dashboards. Tucker was nearly 2 decades ahead of his time, and sometimes being too far ahead also means walking alone. Even so, the legacy of the Tucker 48 lives on. It stands as proof of courage of the spirit that dared to challenge Detroit and of a technical dream history could never forget. Today, every remaining Tucker is considered a marvel, a reminder that sometimes history belongs to those who dare to dream bigger than reality allows. So, tell us, was Preston Tucker a victim of the Big Three? Or was it his own boldness and weak management that caused the dream to collapse? Share your thoughts below. We'd truly love to hear your story.